Welcome back to part 2 of our delicious conversation with a MacArthur-level thinker who spent decades tearing apart dogma in science, culture, and politics, Mr. Howard Bloom. His new book is The Case of the Sexual Cosmos. Part 1, if you didn't catch it, go back. You do not want to miss it. Howard brings up some very wild and wonderful insights into all kinds of things around how we have evolved and how nature doesn't like harmony. And even suggests that Greta Thunberg might be a bit of a downer. More on that if you click back. All right, we're going to dive back in here. Howard, I want to talk to you about something that I think is really quite interesting as a subject. You've talked about in part 1 and certainly in the book, if the universe favors flamboyant creation over sort of decay, because you're talking about this change in laws, what does that say about depression and apathy? Because humans have that. We get depressed. You know that. I know that. We both experienced it. What does that say about humans when we're going into depression? Are these signs that we've stopped evolving in our creativity?
We humans live in groups. Bacteria live in groups of 2 billion, 7 billion. We live in smaller groups than that. And we act as if we were neurons in a collective brain.
Mm-hmm.
And a neuron, if it senses that it's not needed, it may kill itself off.
Yes.
Why? Because some neurons have got a handle on what's going on right now.
Mm-hmm.
And those neurons get additional resources. But some just can't get a clue. And so they either follow along with the leading neurons, or they may commit cell suicide, pre-programmed cell death. Now, that helps the collective intelligence, the group IQ, by focusing resources on the things that are managing to handle the environmental problem of the moment, not on those that just haven't got a handle on things at all. But that's not to your advantage or mine. And we are built in my first book, The Lucifer Principle, and my second book, Global Brain. I point out that we humans are built with self-destruct mechanisms.
Mm-hmm.
We are built with depression. We are built with that kind of blank you go into when you're up against a math exam that you've been studying for 4 weeks, and all of a sudden you can't think of a thing. Those are built into us. Why? To disable us when we are not contributing to solutions to the problem of the moment, and to turn us into followers of those who do have a handle. And that is the basic underlying mechanism, not just of brain development, but they are the basic underlying mechanism of collective intelligence, group intelligence.
But when you talk about have a handle on it, that opens up a whole other realm of conversation, because handle on it means understanding it. It could also mean pretending to have a handle on it and being verbose, being, quote, flamboyant, being dominant,
hyper-confident,
narcissistic, etc., and not really having a handle on it at all. But all of those who feel like they don't will go along. This is groupthink, this is cult mentality, etc.
Absolutely true, and we have an example of that beyond any I know of in history in Donald Trump today, who doesn't realize that he's destroying America's position in the world and that he's destroying the American economy. He doesn't even know that tariffs are sales taxes that you and I pay. And yet he has hyperconfidence. He is, in certain senses, a sick man. He lacks a conscience, totally lacks it. Like children who might be born with no fingers on one hand. He just doesn't have a conscience. So he projects this super confidence, this massive alpha male confidence. And so people follow that. People need that. People need to follow someone who seems to be on top of things. So Donald Trump is missing his apoptotic mechanisms. He's missing his self-destruct mechanisms. He doesn't have depression and the things that you and I would have if we realized we didn't have a handle on things. And he is the most ignorant person in public affairs that at least I have ever seen in my lifetime. So he has no way of knowing the consequences of what he's doing.
But the other side of that is, as we said, these people are following that with the belief system. I've talked to many people about this, and I've talked about the neuroscience of it as well. There are many people who you and I would probably know in common who are very intelligent people who genuinely see this leader as a good leader. And I'm like, I know you're smart, so I don't know how you got to that, really. And I'm not saying that what his rhetoric was bad, because some of his rhetoric was very good. It just there's no ability to fulfill that rhetoric. And it's counter to actually what's going on. So that for me is very interesting from a science and neuroscience and psychology point of view, is an intelligent person would seem to have a clue who abandons that clue in favor of the dominant, which is nonsense.
Right. Well, the trick with Donald Trump is that he has alpha signaling, and he has it beyond belief. And he's mastered it in the current era. He started to publicize himself in 1978. By the 1990s, he had made himself such a superstar that in one of my books, How I Accidentally Started the 60s, I used a Donald Trump joke. That's how well known Donald Trump was when I wrote that book from 1990 to 1995.
Right.
And it's been a long time since then. He's had 35 years since then to build even further. And of course, he had The Apprentice. And you know the story of The Apprentice. When they couldn't find any other hook for him, they knew, the producers of that show knew that Donald Trump would be a good reality show material because he was so well known. So it couldn't miss, but they couldn't find a hook. And finally, they found this hook of presenting Donald Trump as the ultimate leader, above any other leader on the earth. And they shot him apparently 55 stories high in Trump Tower. So he was always looking out in a commanding position over the city. And even though he's a business incompetent, he's had 6 bankruptcies so far, and his 7th will be the bankruptcy of the United States. Despite all of that, they built him for 15 years as the world's ultimate leader. And that's what people believe in. And my Republican friends are Republicans, so they're willing to go along with this. And one of them is Newt Gingrich. And Newt Gingrich is a huge Trump promoter and Trump booster.
But Newt Gingrich, just because I know you have a relationship, you know him, it's easy to look at him and go, he's an idiot because he's following an idiot. And you know, because you and I have talked about it before, Newt Gingrich is a very bright man.
Very.
So that's the piece I'm looking for your insight on for our audience is here's a very bright man who I disagree with on a million things, Newt Gingrich, but I do know he's an intelligent human being.
Right.
Going along with somebody who doesn't know shit about the subject and backing him all the way. That's the piece that for me is really interesting from a psychology point of view.
Well, there is another aspect to Donald Trump. Donald Trump doesn't know how to implement things, how to make things happen. So groups, if a group can come along who can promise to make things happen, he will affiliate with that group.
Of course.
He affiliated with a group led by a guy named Leonard Leo in his first term, who had been working with Mitch McConnell on setting things up so that the Republicans could take over the Supreme Court. And he made a deal basically with Leonard Leo's group that if they gave him a list of judges, those were the judges that he would nominate. This time, there's a group that has been working for the last 3 years to put together a detailed plan for how to strip the government down to bare bones.
Project 2025, the Christian nationalist?
Yes. And so they came to him with a plan so ready-made that they had created a LinkedIn-style database of 20,000 people. Those were the cream. They put out calls for people who believed in MAGA, and they got God knows how many responses, and they interviewed every single one of them to find out which ones were competent and which ones weren't. And the competent ones, they put in a 20,000 person database. Then they had a paint by numbers plan of how to strip the government down to nothing. And each person had a role And they trained that person in the role he would play in the government designed to get rid of the government. And Trump signed on to that plan because it was a plan that advanced his vision, which is making himself like Vladimir Putin, making himself a dictator for life, like his friends Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin and Recep Tayyip Erdogan in Turkey. So they had this worked out in detail. And look what they've done. Thanks to Elon Musk. Now, I know Elon Musk. I have followed Elon Musk for 20 years now. Elon Musk is an idealist. And I don't know how he got suckered into this, but one day, one of my Republican-leaning friends in the military, who I would have expected to be cheering for everything that Donald Trump is doing, called me, and his emotional tone on the phone was something I'd never heard from him before. And he said, "Are we still going to have a republic?" Meaning he couldn't stand what Donald Trump was doing. And he proposed an idea I had never heard of: nerd sniping. Well, us nerds have a peculiar quality. If you set us a challenge and we accept it, we will shut down all the rest of our life and just focus on that challenge. And we will work 30 hours at a time and fall asleep under our desks and get up and work on it more. So the person who apparently gave a compelling challenge to Elon Musk is Donald Trump.
Yes.
And Elon worked his tail off. He worked night and day the way he usually works. So he worked on effectuating the plan, on making real the plan that Project 2025 had been working on for 3 years. All in the name of Donald Trump, because it helps Trump in his dictatorial desires.
As I said, I've written a whole article on what drove Elon Musk to that. And I think there's a lot more to that than...
Well, tell me what you think drove him to that.
I mean, from a psychology point of view, Elon Musk is an abused boy. His father was a horrible human being, still is apparently, by all accounts, was a pretty horrible human being. Elon was severely bullied in school, obviously quite brilliant and on the spectrum. And then on top of that, this is the guy who's producing kids to try and make up for the population. So this is a person who needs adoration. He needs love. He's not the same level of egomaniacal behavior as Trump, but is more emotionally wounded. But his wound and Trump's wound is their common bond, in that they had fathers who were horrendous human beings, who treated them very poorly and who beat the emotion out of them. And so there was a great match there. And so what happens is Trump gives Elon the emotional support of an older man that he needed from his dad. And that need, that hunger is so deep that Elon will go to the nth degree in order to meet that, because he will get the daddy love that he needs. I'm not saying that's conscious. Please understand that. It's because these things are part of the emotional source code of that individual, but it's what's unconsciously driving him. And so when somebody meets that need, the problem with it is, as I wrote about in the article, that once he meets Trump's needs, Trump will stop meeting his, and under the bus he will go.
Right. And I think that's brilliant. I did a YouTube on this subject, and here's how it goes. In 2020, when Joe Biden took over the White House, Elon Musk was a Democrat. Elon Musk had created one of the most amazing pro-environmental things you've ever seen. He didn't create electric cars. Those have been created by General Motors in the 1990s. But nobody knew how to sell them. And Musk, aside from creating an absolutely gorgeous car with astonishing performance capabilities and basically a little bubble of paradise, he managed to sell these things. Despite that, when Joe Biden had an electric vehicle event, he invited Stellantis, Ford, and General Motors, who don't know how to sell electric cars. Who did he not invite? The man who had put the electric car on the map, Elon Musk.
Yeah, that's in the article that I wrote. I said that's where the Democrats shit the bed with Elon, and that's how he went from being left to right, because that little boy needs acknowledgement. And he should have got it, because he made the electric car cool, and he gave away the patent to make it so that GM and all the others can do it. That's why I said he's not a Nazi. He's a little boy who needs love. He got blindsided by them. He lost his rag, and Trump said, well, I'll acknowledge you. You're great. So it's like, all right, we're in.
Well, here's the other element of that story, because your story is basically, as I said, brilliant.
Thank you.
America had not had access to the International Space Station, which was built largely with American money, on an American vehicle for 11 years. Thanks to an aspect of the SMIC, the Space Military Industrial Complex, we could spend an entire other show going into. And after this 11 years of barrenness, buying tickets at $75 million to space from the Russians, how embarrassing, how humiliating can you get? One man created a vehicle that could finally get reliably back and forth to the International Space Station and took humans up, Americans, for the first time on an American vehicle in 11 years. That deserved a phone call from the president.
Absolutely.
That phone call never came. So Biden snubbed Elon Musk because Biden is very pro-union, and a man like Elon, who's creating a whole new way of making a company succeed, has created whole new ways for employees to work. And if he'd had a union, he could not have done that. So it was the snubs from Biden that eventually drove Musk into the hands of Donald Trump. But the first time I saw Elon Musk, he said, when I got out of college, I asked myself, what three things would do the most to change humanity in my lifetime? And my answers were the internet, alternative energy, and space. And so he said, I went into the internet, and of course he helped build PayPal and got close to $1 billion from that. Then he took that $1 billion, skipped number two, skipped alternative energy, and went to space. And when I saw him in 2005, he had not even put a firecracker in a tin can. He had launched nothing. And the space military industrial complex companies were laughing at him.
And they actively humiliated him. His own heroes humiliated him.
So what did he do? As of last week, he has launched 450 Falcon 9 missions to space. No country, no organization, nothing has ever come anywhere near doing that. NASA instead has a rocket that costs $2 billion to launch. $4 billion, sorry, the figure has changed. And you can only launch it once every 2 years. $4 billion, I mean, you can buy 50 or 60 of Elon Musk's flights for that cost.
Yes.
You can have a whole space program for that cost. So right now, changes at NASA are necessary because this program called the Space Launch System, it's known in the business, because I run 3 space groups, it's known as a senatorial launch system because it basically was cobbled together by Congress and the Senate.
Right.
And then rammed down NASA's throat. And things don't work when you work that way. That's a Stalinist way of running a space program. Elon has provided a whole different alternative. And back to the story of the loony insects who flew and the insane dinosaurs who dared to fly, Elon is taking us on that next step. His company now, SpaceX, is a regular space transport company. We've never had anything like it in human history, and that is what is going to take ecosystems to space. That's what's going to allow us to green the solar system and garden the universe.
So honestly, based on that, do you see that we will colonize Mars? And if so, when do you think that will be?
Well, let's see. We'll probably get the first humans to Mars by something like 2035 or earlier, because Elon is aiming at far earlier. He's aiming at this by 2028 or 2027. And if he can only get his Starship to stop blowing up, then we will make it, because the Starship will carry 100 passengers instead of the traditional NASA 3 or 4 passengers. This is a vast difference in scale, and it'll carry tons and tons and tons, 100,000 tons or something like that of cargo.
Yeah.
And again, after I saw Elon speak, I have this thing in my gut, and it's only gone off about 6 times in my life, and it's a superstar detector. And it's how I detected Prince and how I detected Joan Jett and how I detected Chaka Khan. That little thing in my gut went off and said, this person is a superstar, long before they were known to the public.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I was the one who helped get them known by the public.
Yep.
And when I first saw Elon speak, that detector went off, except it said, Bloom, you've been looking for a myth all your life. This is not just a superstar. This is a mythic person. Kids will be following his example 115 years from now. And my gut was extremely specific about that date, 115 years from now. So I had 3 phone conversations with Elon. I hadn't processed verbally why I was talking to him, so I couldn't tell him why I was talking to him. And they were useless. And he said on the 3rd call, well, look, we're not really doing anything on these calls, and I have a lot of other things to do. So I know that Elon is at his core an idealist, or he would never have asked what 3 things will do the most to change humanity in my lifetime. He is focused on Mars. He wants to die in a city on Mars. And one thing about Elon Musk that makes him different from anybody else on the planet is that when he wants to achieve something really badly, he can achieve it.
Yeah.
So it'll be later than Elon is predicting, though he hasn't given us a prediction on exactly when that will happen, because it'll take him more time. As long as he stays alive and healthy, he will get humanity and life to Mars. And there's an old Bloomism, bring space to life by bringing life to space. That is exactly what Elon is in the business of doing.
He's an interesting character because I think there's more complexity to him. For me, Trump is a very simple examination psychologically. Elon has a great deal more depth because he runs very dark and very light.
There's one other thing to be very aware of. A civilization only goes as far as its visionaries will take it.
That's true.
Visionaries who are capable of implementing their visions.
That's very
true. And those
true.
are very few.
Yes.
You have maybe 3 of them in 100 years. And Elon is the greatest one that I have ever met.
Let's just change directions for a minute. You, in your book, talk about replacing the 2nd law of thermodynamics with the 1st law of flamboyance.
Right.
If you could rewrite one more law of nature from scratch, what would it be? And what would you call it?
Well, it's not so much a law as this universe is incredibly creative. It is constantly coming up with things that never existed. When the first atoms came along, nothing like them had ever existed before. When the first sweepings of atoms into giant swirling pools of matter happened, those had never existed before. When those started firing off stars had never existed before. I don't want a law. I want to understand how that creative process happens and why. And I've spent several books on trying to crack the code. And I think the things that I say are, I hope, radically new and will open your eyes to the cosmos in which you live in very different ways from the past. But I haven't cracked that code, and I'm about to be 82 years old. The amount of time left to me to crack it is limited. I would just want a giant nutcracker with which to crack that code.
You talk about sex as nature's metaphor for innovation. From that point of view, what's the biggest romantic failure of modern science in an era that desperately needs to start mixing things up?
It is a mistake that Charles Darwin led us to. Charles Darwin came up with what was called a mechanism, something we can discuss for hours, but a mechanism for evolution.
Right.
And that mechanism was natural selection. And Darwin knew that that was maybe 10% of what evolution was all about, that he was missing the other 90%, because the other 90% is how evolution creates new varieties, new species, new inventions, radically new inventions. Science grabbed onto natural selection, forgot about the importance of the puzzle, the mystery of creativity, cosmic creativity, and has run with natural selection as if you can use natural selection to understand the whole ball of wax. Well, even Darwin knew that that was only 10% of the ball of wax. It's the creative 90% that we don't understand. And I've tried to give you a little inkling of what that creative thing is and how it works in the case of the sexual cosmos, whose subtitle is Everything You Know About Nature is Wrong.
You know, it's also interesting, though, is how even Darwin's theory of evolution is so often misquoted. It's survival of the fittest and the strongest. No, it's the survival of those who can work together. It's a bit more than that. To become strong, yes, but it's not just that. And there's more in there than that, right? You go into that quite in detail.
Right. I tell you that groups have an identity. We know that when we call ourselves Americans, when we call Vladimir Putin's country Russia, when we talk about China. We're talking about group identities. And those group identities are extremely real. And they're at a level of reality that science doesn't see. These are called emergent properties in science. For example, water, when it's flowing. Flow is an emergent property.
Yes.
Of lots and lots of billions of, gazillions of water molecules. But take the temperature down below 32 degrees, and what do you get? All of a sudden, the water's social behavior changes, and it socializes in a whole new way. And that new way is a solid form called ice. Ice is an emergent property. It's a group property. It's a social property. And we haven't sufficiently studied the ghost that arises from a group, that higher identity that arises from a group and makes it China or Russia or the New York Mets or any of these group identities we deal with constantly but don't see in science.
Well, what I put that into, from my point of view, what I put that into is there becomes an emotional source code, a collective that is a morphic field around that tribe. So it's like, this is true because I'm an American. No, this is true because you tap into a morphic field where you hold that belief collectively, and that's what you're actually trying to pull out of the gravity of. And that's where the challenge becomes, is can we innovate and pull out? Because it's very difficult to innovate in the confines of the field.
Right. Well, I have a friend who is a cognitive scientist who plays jazz, and his quartet gets together and they play together. And he shows a remarkable property that is the morphic field you're talking about. They get to a certain point in their playing where a melody arises from the collective, and they hear a melody that, technically speaking, isn't there.
Right.
And they all play to that melody. And what is that emergent melody? It's the morphic field that takes over and fashions the group.
The thing that evolves from the thing.
Right. So that's missing from science. Emergent properties, morphic fields, you could call them, except that gets too close to Rupert Sheldrake and his ideas. Those are too controversial for me to deal with because they don't resonate with my soul.
I think that morphic fields are very interesting, particularly even brain science. There's a lot of really great research around how it impacts neurons in the brain and all the rest of it. But it's not quite in the same framework as Sheldrake, because Sheldrake's stuff is, in my opinion, brilliant, but as you said, quite controversial. But there's an evolution of it, as there is to all things. And that's, how can we think about this in a bigger way and in a more evolved way? And that's what you're saying about this emergent state that comes from. And that's the way I always describe that is the two things that come together don't create a combination of the thing. They create a third thing. My children are not just an expansion of me and my bride. There's something else altogether. There's properties of me and properties of my partner, but there's something else altogether, something unique that can transform the world. Elon Musk's mother and father created Elon Musk, but Elon Musk is not them.
And that's a major point that's made in the case of the sexual cosmos. that we're not in the reproduction business. You're not making little Dov Barons.
Thank God for that.
Yeah, and sex. This is where sex comes in. There is a law in science. It's the law of least effort. Pierre de Maupertuis enunciated it in 1750, and it's held true in science ever since, that nature always takes the shortest path. Well, sex is the longest path you've ever seen in your life. And I'm not just talking about courtship, finding a mate and finding the right one. I'm talking about the molecular processes that go on in sexuality, in sexual recombination, are just astonishing beyond belief. And they're so complicated that a Mensa graduate can't even remember all the details. I spent at least a year and a half just studying that molecular process of sex, and even I can't remember it. Sex is not the shortest path. It is the very longest path that this cosmos has ever invented. And why have, for 1 billion years now, has nature insisted on sex? Because when you and your mate get together and you create a child, that child is a one of a kind. There has never been a child like that on the planet. There may never be another child like that on the planet. So what is the purpose of that? The purpose is simple. The cosmos is a search engine, constantly sending out feelers and sensors to sense its way, to feel its way into the next realm of impossibility.
Yes.
And to drag that impossibility into the realm of reality. And the more feelers the cosmos can produce, feeling its way into impossibility space, and hopefully yanking a little of that impossibility back into the realm of the real. The more feelers, the better.
I love that line, Howard. The dragging the impossible into the realm of reality. I just love that. That's beautiful. And it's a great place for us to finish. Please tell everybody where they can find out more about you, about the new book, and about all the other things that you've got there.
So go to howardbloom.net. That's BLOOM, like the flowers that bloom in the spring, howardbloom.net. Or Howard Bloom, again, BLOOM, howardbloom.institute.
We'll make sure that those are posted in the show notes. Again, Howard, it's been a pleasure and an honor, sir. It's always a pleasure and honor. I hope you'll stay with us to the end. I just love our conversations. We always have so much fun going into these wild and wacky areas, even when we're not recording.
Right.
For you, dear listener, remember, those who control the meaning for the tribe also control the movement of the tribe. Leaders who are committed to positively shaping the political and business landscape know that we must tap into what drives human behavior, and that is the emotional source code. I'm Dov Baron. I show businesses, teams, and leaders how to harness their emotional source code to move their tribe, because unified, actualized meaning is the single monolithic difference between mediocrity and greatness for all individuals and companies. And remember, we need your help to stay relevant, so please go to wherever it is that you tune into from, and do us a favor, rate, review, and subscribe to the show. And a big thank you to you, if you are a regular listener, for sharing the show with everybody you know. Till next time, stay curious, my friends. Stay curious about what you're holding as true, and maybe you need to question it. And maybe there is much more to the chaos than there is to what is plotted out for you. Maybe it's time for us, all of us, to reach into the impossible and drag it back into reality. I'm Dov Baron. I'm here to assist you tapping into your deepest meaning to reach that next level of clarity, focus, purpose, and profit in your business, in your life, and your leadership impact. And I am out.